We're live. Hi everyone. Really happy for my first author chat back to be with Fiona. Do you want to start us off by telling us a bit about your new book? Or all your books?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a bit about the new one. So this is Losing Control. Don't know if you can see it. Just get it into the light. A nice picture of the Middlesbrough Transporter Bridge on the front. And it's my first attempt really at a police procedural. So DI Julie Cadell, who is not the most confident of police officers. She's very good at her job, but she's not very confident with authority and isn't very good at conflict, which is kind of pretty key for a police officer. She gets her first case as a senior investigating officer, and it's a body that's washed up under the HMS Trincomalee, which is in the Hartlepool Royal Naval Museum. And it looks like a pretty straightforward case, but Julie's not so sure.
Cool. And this is, I was going to say, a slight departure from the stuff you've written before.
Yeah, so I've written, this is my 6th book. I've written one which is Phosphate Rocks, which is a little bit of it has a little bit of police procedural in it, but it's really an excuse for writing about science, which is probably where you and I, Carolina, enjoy trying to introduce science into books in a way that's hopefully interesting to the reader, to the non-scientific reader. So yes, and in fact, one of the characters in Phosphate Rocks does appear briefly, the detective, Rose Irvine. But yeah, my other books, the other 4 books, are all more action-adventure thrillers with a pretty much, what's the word, bulletproof heroine who is extremely confident and never lets anything get in her way, whereas this character, my main character in this book, is a little more human, I think, and a little more like you and me. Not you and me, Caroline, but in general, a bit more like them.
I got where you were going, I think.
Yeah.
Donna said hello to both of us.
Hello, Donna.
One of the first things I noticed while I was reading this is that when they discover the body, which is, there's no spoiler in this because they're going to discover the body, aren't they? They call the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard is in the Humber.
And the Coast Guard is in?
And they over in the Humber, and they do all
in the Humber. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Range.
So I had a huge amount of help from the Coast Guard, actually. They've been absolutely wonderful. And what I didn't completely realise before when I'm starting writing it, I had a Coast Guard in Hartlepool, which of course doesn't actually happen. There's a harbour master, but there isn't a Coast Guard. They're centralised in sort of Aberdeen and Bridlington and the south coast. So they cover a huge amount of coastline, and rescues are organised with local volunteers. But the normal day-to-day work of the Coast Guard is done in those on the East Coast, at least, done in those 3 locations. So they've got a huge amount of coastline to cover. But they were extreme. They've been absolutely brilliant about that. They I mean, it's a secret because they don't want to be named in the book, because they're, as public servants, they're not really they don't give advice, but they were willing to answer my daft questions.
I mean, that's nice, isn't it? It's good. It's amazing how many people are willing to help, like authors, sort of get things right. I think that's always really nice. Tell us a little bit about the main character in the book.
So DI Julie Cadell, she is I think it's fair to say that she lacks confidence. She's been a part-timer. She's got children. She's got other responsibilities, and even before her marriage broke up, she was very much the person who just did everything in the back room. She fixed everything. She looked after everything, but she never really got any credit for anything she did. And she's now, for various reasons, she's stepped up to a different force, to a different job, a much more responsible job. And she is really struggling with some of the male officers who don't actually have much respect for her authority, and are kind of working to undermine her behind the scenes. So she is struggling throughout the book in how to handle that well. And she's quite a cerebral person. I mean, she's not unlike my other characters who kind of are super smart. She's just a normal person who reads books and is quite intuitive. But she really struggles with some of the people on the team and her boss. She really struggles with her boss. Story of my life, really.
To be fair, her boss at the moment, as far as I've got into the book, isn't a very nice person.
He's not a very nice person, no. And I'm the Cleveland Police Force, which is where she's based. Obviously, mine is a fictional version of the Cleveland Police Force, but the Cleveland Police Force has had a long history of problems with leadership, which is on the public record. Most police officers are wonderful people who do a very good job, but there's always in every walk of life, there's always a few bad ones.
Is that where the inspiration for the sort of horrific press conference came from?
Yes, I enjoyed that. No, it's funny. I don't know where things come. Sometimes I feel like I'm a kind of radio receiver, and when I start writing, all sorts of things just sort of appear, and I've no idea where they've come from. So I didn't set out deliberately to be rude to Cleveland's police force. I've been very grateful to them on occasion, so they're the last people I want to alienate. But no, I just had a bit of fun with that, and also I wanted the police chief to get a little bit of his comeuppance, just to give Julie a little bit of courage to carry on.
There's a lovely mention of the group in the back as well.
Yeah.
Can you name the characters?
Well, I did. I mean, I struggled a little bit with Hartlepool names because I've worked in Seal Sands and I've worked in Hartlepool, so I had a lot of colleagues, but I thought it would be a bit cheeky to use their names. So I actually came to the group and asked them for some advice, and I got the most brilliant response. I think I got about 30 or 40 people who had suggestions, and I've used about 10 of the suggestions. But some of the names are just fantastic, like Chip Chase. And I've got a whole spreadsheet of names. So the ones I didn't use in this book will appear in the future books, because I've got quite a long series planned out in this one, which is why, spoiler alert, not everything will be wrapped up in this first one.
Okay. I think that's okay as long as the main parts are wrapped up.
Yeah. But some people may not have got their comeuppance yet.
I think also the other thing that's quite interesting about this is like the outside kind of family drama she's having as well.
Yeah. Well, I have 2 boys, so I'm quite used to kind of teenage boy muddy trainers on white carpets and food deliveries. So yes, so there was a little bit of kind of fondly remembering chaotic family life. I was very lucky. I am very lucky in that my partner does a lot of the family stuff. So he's a brilliant cook, and he's much cleaner and tidier than I am. But I imagine for anybody who is working and perhaps doesn't have as much support, then those years are pretty much chaotic as you try and kind of herd kittens in the form of teenage children.
Yeah, and a particularly moody teenage boy.
Yeah. Well, of course, you see them every day, don't you, at school?
Yeah, they can be a challenge, can't they?
Yeah, they can. They can also
Really,
be utterly delightful.
yeah,
I'm very fond of her son. Um,
yeah,
but
he is. I'm coming round to him.
yeah, yeah, he's going through a hard time, poor lad.
He is, yeah.
Yeah, but you know, he's basically a good one. He's just not very thoughtful. Doesn't really think about his mum.
And this is sort of getting into one of your passions as well, isn't it? Because it's going to go to. I mean,
Bhopal.
we're not yeah,
Yeah,
we're not
yeah.
spoiling anything here, are
No, not
we?
spoiling
Because
anything. Yeah. And I've been trying to write about it, so I don't know for people who won't remember or weren't born in 1984. In 1984, there was the worst accident in the world happened in Bhopal in India when a toxic gas was released from a pesticide factory, and it killed thousands of people just overnight. And people either died in their sleep or died running away from this horrible choking gas cloud. And hundreds of thousands were injured, and in fact, it looks like it's had some effect on some chromosomal damage, and had some effect on the children of the gas exposed population. So really, really horrible and awful accident, and never really been properly cleaned up or investigated. So there was an out of court settlement reached between Union Carbide Corporation, which was the company responsible for the pesticide factory, and the government of India. And people who could prove that they'd been affected got a few $100s. But it wiped out whole families. So, there were many victims who didn't actually have a surviving relative to go to request compensation. And it was a torturous legal process which could take 20 years. And most of the victims or many of the victims were poor and illiterate. And it was, they were taken for a ride by lawyers and people purporting to be doctors. So it's a horrible, horrible mess. But what really shocked me is when I was working in India, I went to visit the town, and I was absolutely shocked to find that the chemical factory is still standing, and it's abandoned. It's rusting and falling to bits, but it's still there. It still sort of towers over that part of the lower town. And I was completely horrified because there's still lots of chemicals and waste buried on the site, which is leaching into the groundwater. So I started about 10 years ago, sort of trying to figure it out for myself first of all, and then trying to get some kind of interest in fixing it. I mean, it'll have to be an Indian government led or a state of Madhya Pradesh led cleanup, but I think the international chemical industry owes it to the victims to give some support to actually close this horrible chapter. 40 years on, can you believe it? 40 years of living next to an abandoned factory that killed your family. That's just unspeakable. Anyway, it made me think about Teesside because, as you know, I worked in the chemical industry. I've worked in Seal Sands, I've worked in Wilton, I've worked in Billingham, and I'm glad to say that things have changed since 1984, and a lot of things are much, much better controlled. But the accident happened when the site was closing down, and it always worries me when you've got things like, you can see all of our oil and gas. I mean, in Hartlepool, you can see the old oil rigs, the old oil platforms being towed in to be dismantled. And there's a lot of danger when things stop being profitable, because they've still got to be cleaned up, but no one's really interested. So it was a kind of, in part, I tried to, I don't want to give away the connection, but there is a parallel that I've used to kind of draw attention to the fact that there's been this horrible injustice that's never been properly resolved.
I think Donna's been very mean considering I've also been poorly this week by telling us that she turned 1 in August, 84.
Oh, right. Oh, baby. You see, I just started my first job, Donna, so that shows you how old I am.
had not started a job, I was definitely not one either.
Yeah.
That's just me.
But anyway, in case anyone's worried, I mean, it's mainly a cop story, and the Bhopal element is in the background, just to explain the threat.
But I think it's good to go back because people sort of, and I think you make this point in the book a little bit, don't you, with someone, that people are kind of really interested in the Chernobyl incident. You know, there's like games that are made of it, and people have played it. You know, people talk about all the other disasters that no one really talks about.
Yeah. And I've thought a lot about why that is, because I think, I mean, with Chernobyl, it's clear that it was so serious that had the core actually melted into the water table, it would have made a lot of Central Europe uninhabitable, and it would have been really, really serious. And you know, the radioactive cloud affected us in the northeast, and I was living in Cumbria at the time, and it certainly had a big effect there. So you know, that there was a real danger to us in Europe. So I think that's, but whereas in India it was very localized to a very poor community living in a town in the center of India, and so it seemed a very long way away. So I think that's possibly one reason, because there was no direct impact on us. I think secondly, the power of the US lawyers to try and make it look like a wholly Indian problem, that had absolutely nothing, you know, that could only have happened there and had nothing to do with, you know, the Western chemical industry or industry of any sort, which I think was very, in my view, they're pretty much rascals, really. I mean, I know the lawyers' jobs is to defend their client, but even so, they made a case for an act of sabotage by an employee, which has since been completely discredited as a conspiracy theory that has no, you know, factual basis at all. But it sort of managed to divert attention away from what actually happened. And then I think, you know, India is a complicated place, because this was a fairly marginalized group. I mean, visiting India is really interesting to realize just how stratified it is. And, you know, I mean, the British caste system and the Indian caste system, you know, it's just a marriage made in heaven. You can see how, you know, the British must have thought they'd struck very lucky when they realized that they could keep the anyway, we could talk for hours about colonial bad behavior in India, but yeah, so I think in India itself as well, it wasn't as big news as it would have been if it had happened in a different country, or if it had affected a population that had more power or more voice. So yeah, but it's still difficult. It is still difficult to understand why it isn't. I wouldn't, not better known in the sense that we want to wallow in stories of disaster and misery, but better known in the sense that it was important in terms of changing how we operate our factories now, and how we involve communities around hazardous operations.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of why we do need to know about them, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, legislation is written in blood, so we don't learn very much when things go well, but unfortunately we tend to learn things when things go catastrophically badly. And I think both with nuclear power and with production of pesticides, we've learned from things that have gone horribly wrong.
You've got some wonderful quotes from authors on your book as well, haven't you? Like some stellar names, like Anne Cleese, William Shaw.
Aren't crime writers wonderful people? Yeah. I did an event with Crossing the T's with Anne Cleves in Billingham Library, and I had a really nice chat with her. Oh, she's such a wonderful person to interview because you don't need to say anything. I mean, she's got so many stories and she's so engaging and she's such fun. And I really enjoyed the event, and she's very kind and polite and supportive of other authors. And she asked me what I was doing, and I told her about this book, and I said I was a bit worried I had too many characters, and she said, well, basically at the end of the conversation, she said, by all means, send it to me. And I didn't really expect anything. I was more just wanting her, because she does a brilliant job in her books of doing lots of points of view and writing from many different characters. So she's quite inspirational. And she read it incredibly quickly and said, would you like a blurb? Well, would I like a blurb? Yes, please, Anne Cleves. So, so she gave me a lovely quote. And William Shaw was one of the first people I was ever on a panel with at Crime Fest in Bristol. And I've kept in touch with him ever since because he's such a thoroughly lovely person. And so again, I'm quite nervous about approaching people who are such good writers. But again, he was extremely happy, and Trevor Wood was a delight, as was Jane Jesmond. So yeah, I was pretty pleased, and I've collected some others since. So yeah, they just didn't make it onto the cover.
I think William Shaw is possibly one of the nicest men in.
Oh, one of the nicest men, and I love his books because he writes so insightfully, I think, about teenagers, apart from anything else. I love his teenage characters, and also he manages to make his books about real social issues without ever boring you. The actual. I love The Birdwatcher in that series, which I think The Birdwatcher was going to be a standalone, but he's written.
It can't be a standalone.
It can't be a standalone. We all wanted it, and we wanted so much more. Yeah. So yeah, he's just a thoroughly lovely bloke, as indeed is Trevor Wood. Yeah. So
they're all fantastic authors.
Yeah.
You were saying you wanted to talk to us about Jane Jesmond's.
Oh yes. So I'm a huge fan of Jane Jesmond. I don't know if you're. Oh, let's see if I can.
I think she's coming to us for a chat.
Oh, excellent. That's good. So this is her latest book, which is called Gone to Earth, and it's the third in the series. The first one is On the Edge, the second one is Cut Adrift, and this is the third one. And her main character is a kind of thrill seeker. She's a climber who's really got into a bit of bad company. She's a kind of climber who likes going into abandoned buildings with a group of people to explore. So, climbing around really dangerous places. But anyway, she's trying to mend her ways. And in this story, she actually ends up going into some tunnels under Glasgow. And it's very, very good and very exciting. And she writes brilliantly. And again, there are always interesting social issues. And this one, without giving anything away, it's a lot about migration and trafficking. And there's a thread running right through, which starts from the very first book. And her other books, which I think you've read, Caroline, my favourite is A Quiet Contagion. I haven't got it to hand, but it's a book about a man who dies right at the beginning, and it's his granddaughter trying to figure out what happened. And it's a fascinating book.
It really was. I talked to Jane about that, and she was so lovely to talk to.
Yeah, she did so much research, and it was obviously quite a personal book for her as well. Going to Coventry and finding out, everything about the polio epidemic in the 1950s. So yeah, I love books where, I don't want a book that's just full of bits out of Wikipedia, but I love books where I feel that the author has done their research and knows more than they're telling me. And I really like it if I come away from a book having learned something.
So this, because your other series is mostly kind of jet setting, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So the very first book I had published, there we go, The Chemical Detective. Oh, try and get it in the shot. There we go. I'm not very good at this, am I? And the second one, so that one deals with Chernobyl in the Ukraine, tangentially. This one, the chemical reaction, is set in China and deals with, among other things, different forms of renewable power, like hydroelectric, although only tangentially, don't worry, there is a story. And the third and the fourth are set in Brazil, and there's a lot of mining going on there. And this one has a freight train going across Brazil where Jack is traveling, chasing somebody.
You gotta love like a train in the book.
Yeah. So those are the other four. And I mean, I'm writing on Substack at the moment, actually. I'm just doing an experiment. I'm writing a Jack Silver book on Substack, but it's a first draft and it's going all over the place. So you'd be forgiven for not recognizing. I mean, there's not much Jack in it so far because I've got to tell the rest of the story to myself, and then I can decide where she appears, or it may end up not having Jack at all, even though I started off with that with my intent. That was my intention, which does sometimes happen. You start off writing thinking you're going to do one thing and you end up doing something completely different. But in the end, I think you let the story and the characters lead and see where they go. And that's a complete departure for me, because when I started out, when I wrote The Chemical Detective, it was planned to within an inch of its life, with a spreadsheet and a PowerPoint presentation and a Microsoft project plan, and it's quite. Maybe it's not a bad thing when you're starting out, but I found as I continued that actually the fun was to go a little bit off piste and see where the adventure wanted to go, rather than it's good to have a kind of end point, maybe a midpoint and a start point, but it was a lot more. It's a lot more fun. I find it's a lot more fun to write if I'm not quite sure where it's going, and I'm quite often not quite sure who done it or why. So it's as much a voyage of discovery for me as in the first draft as for the reader. By the time the reader gets it, it's a bit more polished. But
I have to say as well, when you were writing about her son's texts in it, you talked about them being disemboweled. I love that. Did you make that word up?
I looked it up. I was looking for a word which because I don't know if I mean, because I'm an old-fashioned person, I will spell out in a text the full word, whereas my sons will, just use the consonants.
No, I'm a full word.
Yeah, and I sort of look at the text from them and sort of try to figure out. And it's not so bad now, actually, because there's a lot of predictive text. So if you start the word, it'll guess what you're saying. So you don't. But I'm still kind of typing out the full word. Yeah, so trying to, I mean, use of emojis as well, trying to, because it's not that there is a rule. Every group of people kind of create their own rules. So a blue heart between you and me might be fine, but it might mean something completely different to another group of people. So yeah, I thought that was, I found that quite interesting. I could have gone down a kind of emoji rabbit hole there trying to research it, but I controlled myself.
I just came across the word. I was like, I love that word.
Yes. Yeah.
You should have claimed credit. You should have been, yes, I entirely.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, it does exist, disemboweled. Yeah.
It didn't exist before I wrote this book.
Yeah, maybe I can go and change the entry and say invented by Fiona Erskine.
Wait, I mean, if it was on Wikipedia, you probably could.
Yeah, my husband did that once. We were having an argument, well, a discussion, he would call it, an argument about something factual. And I was pretty sure that I was right, and he was pretty sure that he was right. Anyway, he went away, and actually, when he realized that I was right and he was wrong, he actually changed it on Wikipedia and then came back and showed me that he was right. That was in the days when Wikipedia didn't have many people making changes, so a single person could. Of course, it was changed back the next day, so I want to put it right. So, not me.
That's so funny. I don't think my husband would go that far.
Oh, not that he'd tell you.
Not that he'd tell me, no.
Yeah, at least Jonathan came clean. Yeah.
Although he does send me messages that are just emojis.
Oh, that's nice. Well, I hope they're nice emojis.
Mostly, sometimes they're just nonsensical.
Yeah.
So I also like the sort of random amounts of IT support there is in this as well.
Ah, yes.
Everyone has problems with IT support, don't they?
Well, it really struck me because when I was working at the power station up at Linemouth, because of the national infrastructure security requirements, we had a huge emphasis on cybersecurity because what nobody wants is for a cyber attack to turn off the lights when it's cold like today. But it always struck me that whenever I had an IT problem, somebody would simply take over my computer and go into the operating system and click some keys and then kind of just move around my files. I mean, obviously I'd give them permission, it'd be the help desk taking over my computer, but it did occur to me that it would be, if someone was wished ill, that it would be relatively easy to kind of introduce some Trojan horse into my computer. And as indeed has happened. I mean, there's been some really so I should have said this book is also about a very nasty cyber attack. I just it's amazing how much power we give people. The other people that are always struck me is that we almost treat as invisible are cleaners. In every job I've ever had, after the office staff go home, either first thing in the morning or late at night, cleaners come in and unlock your office and clean things up. And although some companies have clean desk policies, I am the messiest person in the world, and I rarely, unless I was ordered with threat of dismissal, I was not the best person for tidying up my desk. So it did always occur to me that if somebody wished to create mischief, then posing as a cleaner or in an IT help desk would be pretty good ways of discovering a company's secrets.
Yeah, it's a good way. See, this is how crime writers' brains work.
I know, it's awful, isn't it? Yeah, we're not normal people, are we?
I'm not a clean desk person either.
No, it's tough. I quite like a bit of chaos. It kind of helps because I'm usually doing lots of things at the same time.
But then you normally know where stuff is.
Exactly. Yes, it looks like chaos to other people, but I know exactly where everything is, and I never have any difficulty finding. Like, I don't know if you've got to the section yet where she's looking for something in the fridge, or at least her son has looked for something in the fridge and been unable to find it, because he's literally opened the door and looked in the fridge. Whereas we all know if you want to find something in the fridge, you have to open the door and then move everything out of the way to find the thing that's hidden at the back.
No, I don't think I've got to that part yet. I mean, it's not a spoiler, so it's fine.
No, it's not a spoiler. No, it's very, very dull, but it does have a point.
Was it quite difficult writing the chapters from the different people's point of view?
No, and I in fact, it had twice as many points of view at the start. And the first editor I worked with, Rebecca Jameson, was pretty much horrified and suggested I significantly reduce it. I think when we first looked at it, we talked about reducing it to 2, and I just couldn't bear to lose Alf in particular, because I'm very fond of Alf. So I think I have 4 or 5 points of view, but to me that's the great unblocking for me. I always alternate points of view, and sometimes I then change them into someone else's character's eyes, but it helps me see it. In fact, there are many chapters that I might have written from 2 or 3 points of view and then chosen which one to use. because it unlocks things for me. I find it very constraining if you only see it through Julie's eyes, because Julie's really nice and I'm incredibly fond of her, but she's not always as confident as she should be. And, sometimes she needs a cuddle, sometimes she needs a kick up the backside. So it's really handy being able to look at it. In fact, when I had more characters, I had points of view from Ian, who is her rather unpleasant sergeant, and that he's great fun to write because he's not very nice at all.
No, he's particularly unpleasant, isn't he?
Yeah, but I don't know. He's annoyed that she's got a promotion, which he thinks he should have got. So
I mean, you've got a reason for the annoyance.
Yeah, and he's and she's very detailed and thorough, and he just wants to jump to bashing people. So she's always going to be more successful than he is, unless people need bashed, which they haven't done so far.
But and maybe he needs to learn that he needs to not always bash people.
Exactly. And she is trying to be a good boss. She is trying to coach him, but he's not very receptive to coaching. And I mean, I don't know if this has happened to you, but there are people who really, really do like to be told what to do, and there are other people who really, really, really bridle at it. And I guess it's finding the right balance, because you can't always give people exactly what they want. Sometimes they have to adapt too. But I do like the idea of a leader being someone who removes obstacles from other people's path so they can be the best they can be. I've always liked that sort of model, rather than a sort of a Napoleon sort of shouting from this horse.
So William is watching, and Donna had said before that William Shaw is 100% one of the nicest men, as is Trevor Wood. And he said Trevor Wood isn't as nice as him. They're going to fight it out someday. Donna said, can she ask a random question? What is it that you were drinking?
Oh, it's actually grapefruit. It's pink grapefruit and water. I know it looks quite glowy, but because I'm on a dry January, which it's good for me, I know. But so I've my brother brought me lots of different interesting cordials to try, so that I didn't suffer too much, and it's very nice, I have to say.
You're dry January.
Yeah, January's a very long month.
Yeah, I don't understand why people try new things in January.
It's daft, isn't it? Yeah. Well, I confess I didn't much feel like drinking on the 1st of January, but that's my own fault. So.
Are you a celebrating New Year kind of person?
Yeah. We've got lovely friends in Skipton who we go, and in fact, it's people we've known for since 1979. So how long is that? 46 years. Yeah. So a group of people, we went to university together, and we still get together at New Year. And it's just 4 couples, and it was we go for a very long walk on New Year's Eve, and then we all cook together and stay up and see in the new year. So it's a very nice thing to do. This year it was so wet and windy. And Yorkshire's full of stiles, so it's not like you can just, it's not like the Lake District where you can just kind of stride out. Every 100 yards you've got to do a kind of, an assault course over a sort of 12-foot wall with a gap this wide to get through. So my knees were really feeling it by the time we got back. But it's very nice, because if you've done a 4 or 5 hour walk in the wind and the rain, then you feel you can eat and drink as much as you like.
Yeah, that's true. So far, I've tried flu for January. I think I'm going to give it up. I'm pretty over it. Don't think I can carry it on. Do we meet Alf again? Because you said that he's so lovely.
He is lovely, yes, and he's missing his daughter in Melbourne. and yeah, and he doesn't really know his grandsons, which is a real shame. And I've got to be, it's always tremendously dangerous not to realize what you're writing about, because my youngest son has just moved to New Zealand, so I have to be yeah, I have to be incredibly. You don't. I don't think that I didn't. There was no deliberate collection, but we're off to see him in February, so it's my first ever trip to New Zealand. I'm very excited about that. In fact, I've been reading a lot of New Zealand authors, some fantastic Vanda Simon, and some other Arenda writers who I first listened to at Bloody Scotland in Stirling. So there's some really, really good crime writing in New Zealand. I'll pop it up in the crime club. I don't know if anyone's come across them, if anyone else has read them, but there's some really, really fantastic, just different,
Yeah, it was kind of, I did, like when I met Alf at the beginning of the book, I was hoping we would get to meet him again.
Yeah, he hasn't gone away. He still has an important role to play before the end.
Good, that's good. I'm glad that we get to meet him again.
Yeah.
Will some of the characters come back in book 2?
Yeah, definitely. Yes. Well, Julie will definitely be back. There might be one of the characters might be in prison, so we'll see how we get on there. But yes, they will definitely come back, and there's quite a lot of hooks in the first book that I will pick up in the next, probably not all in the next book, but over the next couple of books.
When do you think when's book 2 coming out?
Yeah, so this experiment I'm doing on Substack, I'm kind of telling myself the wider story, and then once I've figured it out, then I'll get on with book 2. But this was quite a quick book to write, actually. I think I started in November last 2 years ago, so 2023, and it went to the development editor, I think, in May of 2024, and it was out by the end of October, by the beginning of November. So I won't try and write in the future. In future, that's a bit dangerous, because the weather doesn't always do what you want it to do. So I think I will. I think the next book will kind of start at Christmas, or while Julie's still in hospital. Oh, sorry, gave something away there. So I think the next book will probably start at Christmas, and then carry on, but at least I will know what the weather was like rather than having to invent it.
Yeah, because the weather is very important in this one, isn't it?
It is. Well, yeah, I don't know about you, but weather in Teesside is quite important. I mean, I most of my work, I mean, I'm now teaching at Sheffield University, but when I was working in Seal Sands and other places, a lot of my work was outdoors. So you really notice the weather.
Yes, it can make a big difference to your day. The weather. William says Losing Control is a great book.
Oh, thank you, William. You are so nice. You see what I said?
It's true. It was. I took a bit of time to get like thoroughly going reading it, just because I was poorly. I was saying to my husband, I was like, I'm really sad it's took me so long to get into it because it's so good.
Well, the other one thing I had to cut down a lot is I had a lot more on the autopsy originally. So I had the great privilege of interviewing Dr. Shepherd at Bay Tales, and he's written some brilliant books which are so thoughtful and respectful, and are great almost in a way. I mean, they are detective books because the stories he tells about problem solving and trying to figure out why somebody has died, or the circumstances in which they've died. And so I read his books, and I really, really enjoyed talking to him. So I'm not don't like gory things, and I've tried to not make it too yucky because I'm a bit squeamish. But I did think the whole kind of forensic nature of autopsy was really interesting. And so yeah, so that was part of the book that I started out with more of, and then cut back a bit on. Sorry, I don't know where that came from. That was just a ramble.
Donna's saying you should tell us more about these events when you are doing them, because she loves Dr. Shepherd.
Oh, isn't he fantastic? Yeah.
Yeah, I read one of his books, and I think I've got at least another one to read, and they are fascinating.
They are, and I think they. I mean, as I say, they're sort of. He's very good at setting out a kind of mystery, and then describing how he goes about solving it. So, you know, especially when somebody has an unexplained death. It was, yeah, really, really fascinating.
Was it a bit daunting entering the world of a police procedural for the first?
Not really, because I remember listening to Yrsa Sigurdardóttir. I think I've got the right Sigurdardóttir, the Icelandic crime writer. I think it was Yrsa, who's a civil engineer, and someone asked her at an event, I think it must have been Bloody Scotland again, it might have been Theakston's Crime, somebody asked her how much research she'd done into Icelandic police procedure, and she said absolutely none, I made it up. And I have to confess that I mean, I do have the police manual, and I do occasionally, I do look things up, and I also had an enormous amount of help from the wonderful Effie Birch, who was a Hartlepool, who did work for the police service in Hartlepool in child protection. And she was so generous with her time. And Ian Suter from, who was a policeman up in Shetland, and who now works in a library, and he came to talk to the Scottish chapter of the CWA, and he was utterly fascinating as well. And then when I was at Theakston's last year, I was on a crime panel with two wonderful people, one of whom was a serving police officer, one of whom is in forensics, and they were kind enough to kind of do a bit of a check. I mean, I didn't want it, you know, it's not a documentary. I didn't want it didn't need to be super accurate, but I just didn't want someone who knew what they were talking about to go, oh, and have to put it down. It's a bit like when you or I read something scientific and someone has got it completely wrong. It just kind of puts you off. So I just wanted to pass that put it away test. And so at least the nice people who helped me, I did have to change some things. Originally I'd interrupted the autopsy to let something else happen, and I got told off for that. So they did catch some things that I got completely wrong, but by and large I made it up, because in the end, if you followed a real police investigation, there is so much paperwork and there are so many things that you have to do, and senior investigating officers rarely leave the office. I mean, it's the rest of their team who actually do the getting out and about and talking to people stuff.
Yeah, and you've got to make it work in fiction, haven't you?
Yeah. Trying to get a balance. Yeah.
So tell us what you've read recently and really enjoyed.
Oh yeah, well,
you said you came prepared. So
I came prepared. Yeah. So I have read the one. This one, Steph Penny, was new to me. The Long Water. Yeah. So my Christmas presents, I've now explained to the family that the only thing I want are hardback books, because I love hardback books. They're stupidly expensive, but then I'd much rather have a single hardback book as a present than, you know, bubble bath or anything else. So that's what I got. So Steph Penny, The Long Water. Can you see that? I haven't read any Steph Penny before, but it's a beautiful, beautiful book about a Norwegian mining community, and a teenager goes missing. And it's a great exploration of the kind of the background to, and this is right up in the Arctic Circle, and it's incredibly atmospheric, and it also talks quite a lot about the history, because this part of the world was fought over by the Germans, the Allies, and so there's some kind of quite nasty secrets in this very small community. But it's got the most fantastic characters, the best bad-tempered, grumpy old woman that I've ever come across. You warm to her very quickly, but she really is. She only loves her dog. She doesn't really want to talk to anybody else, and she hasn't been a very good mother. But it's one of the main characters is a school teacher, and she's got quite a strong part in it, and her relationship with the teenagers at school is really, really nicely done. So I thoroughly recommend this one. Oh, there we go. The Long Water, it's called. And the one that I'm completely engrossed in at the moment is Paula Hawkins' The Blue Hour. And I read The Girl on the Train, which was Paula Hawkins', sort of standout debut, and I quite enjoyed it. But this is a whole. Oh, I've gone very dark, haven't I? Okay, don't know why. Turn that off. Yeah, this is about an artist who lives on a remote Scottish island, and on her death, she bequeaths her all her artworks to the person who is her bitter enemy in life, and he's kind of surprised and delighted, and he's a bit of a twit, so he doesn't really suspect anything. He just thinks that she realized that she was in the wrong all the time, until when one of the exhibits is on display in Tate Modern, they discover that there's a human bone incorporated into the sculpture, and it all goes from there. So it's a dead artist, the son of the curator, who is a huge fan of the dead artist, is kind of given the task of trying to figure out exactly what went on. And it's very atmospheric. It's beautifully written. So some of it happens on this Scottish island, which is a bit sort of like a West Coast Lindisfarne. It's cut off by the tide every for sort of 3 hours every 12 hours, or however long high tide is, I'm not sure. So it's got a lovely rhythm with the cut of tides coming in and out, and the person who's living on the island is the companion of the artist, and no one's quite sure whether she was a friend, a lover, a muse, a model. Anyway, she's not giving away much, but she obviously knows a lot more than she's telling. So again, it's another great book where the main character is an older woman and isn't very conventional. So I think I really like both of these books because they've got really strong grown-ups in them. There we go.
Yeah, I kind of like it, the idea of being a grumpy old woman who only.
Yeah, I think it's high time. I think we've been nice for long enough. We can, we can get grumpy, but in a good way, in a constructive, and we do what we want to do way.
It's do you want to remind people who are watching, if they haven't already bought Losing Control, why they're going to go away and do it?
Sorry, why they haven't bought?
If they haven't already got Losing Control, why they're going to go away and do it?
Okay, all right. Well, the first thing is it's my first experiment on Kindle Unlimited. So number one is it's free, or free if you've signed up to Kindle Unlimited. So you lose nothing from giving it a try. Number two is it is a book from the heart. So it's probably the book I wanted to write in terms of the background subject matter. And it's taken me a long time to find a way to write it in a way that hopefully is interesting to everybody. And it's got some brilliant characters. So Alf, the night watchman, he's on his own. His wife has passed away quite recently, and he still goes to talk to her every day. So he's struggling a little bit with guilt and grief, and his daughter lives in Melbourne, so he's really very much on his own. But he's quite he's a good bloke, and he takes his job very seriously. So he works permanent nights and spends a lot of time cleaning porter cabin toilets. But he's no fool. And Julie Cadell is sort of every woman. She's nothing particularly special, but she's quite tenacious and thorough and lacking in confidence, and hopefully will give her a bit more confidence by the end of the book, if she survives, that is, because we never know. And then there's a kind of cast of characters which include IT support, who are the kind of invisible heroes of most of our lives. But the core of the book is a cyber attack. So we're used to thinking about terrorists in terms of tangible people that we can see and see what they're doing, and the idea of a cyber attack happening from a long way away, affecting our lives and health is I think a really scary one. So you'll know a lot more about how to prevent cyber attacks by the time you finish the book.
Which is, I mean,
I'm going to have to work on my pitch, aren't I?
No, that was nice. Also, it's just a really good book.
Well, it was. I wouldn't say it was easy to write, but it flowed. So sometimes I've had to do a lot of chopping and changing, but this one kind of it was written quite. It came quite easily, put it that way. But I think it's because I've been pondering it for a very long time, and I always like the idea of the underdog and the person that no one really rates very highly, proving that they're perfectly capable. And both Alf and Julie are in that position.
Excellent. And then that's all that's left to say. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. And I will. Shall I put in the chat the books that we talked about, and yeah, because we talked about quite a few this evening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kaz.